The way we open a game of chess largely shapes the type of game that will be played. Will it be a fast-paced, aggressive game filled with tactics and attacks, or a slower, strategic game with more positional maneuvering? It's up to you and your opponent. The most popular white opening is e4. You may have heard of the Ruy Lopez, Italian game, and Sicilian defense openings. They all start with the move e4. Now let's take a closer look at the basic ideas behind these e4 openings. Black's most classical defense to e4 is e5, gaining an equal amount of central space. And after the usual knight f3 and knight c6, one of the most classical openings is known as the Italian game, or gioco piano, meaning quiet game. The opening turns into the Italian game after bishop to c4, controlling the center and attacking Black's weak point on f7. Black now has two main options, bishop to c5 or knight to f6. After knight to f6, although this is a sensible developing move, it does allow the complicated knight to g5, joining the bishop on c4 in attacking f7. This leads to very dangerous attacking lines, and Black has to know exactly what to do to avoid getting into a very bad or losing position quickly. For this reason, we recommend playing the more straightforward bishop to c5. Black develops the bishop to an active diagonal, pointing at the weak f2 square. Notice that white cannot play knight to g5 because Black's queen protects that square. So if white plays d3, Black develops the knight with knight to f6. White should continue by castling and focusing on completing development. But if white plays knight to g5, hoping to set up an attack against f7, Black can simply castle, moving the king to safety and adding the rook to the defense of f7. Sometimes white insists on attacking f7 and will play knight takes f7. Although it may look a little scary to expose your king to attack, Black is perfectly fine after rook takes f7, bishop takes f7, and king takes f7. Notice that Black has both knights and a bishop developed, and white has not developed a single piece other than pawns. Even though Black's king looks exposed, it is not easy to attack it. Black will continue to complete development much more quickly than white, and Black can always move the king back to g8 and even h8 if you're really worried about king safety. Now let's take a look at white's most popular response to e5, the Ruy Lopez. After bishop to b5, this opening is known as the Ruy Lopez. White puts pressure on Black's knight that is helping protect the pawn on e5 and control the center. Black's most popular move is a6, attacking white's bishop. White sometimes will capture the knight with bishop takes c6. White gives up the light-squared bishop to double Black's pawns on the c-file. This is known as the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez. Black should recapture with d takes c6. White can castle and play against Black's slightly worse pawn structure with the doubled pawns on the c-file. But white should not try to win a pawn after knight takes e5. Black can now play queen to d4, attacking both the knight on e5 and the pawn on e4. After white moves the knight to safety, Black captures the e4 pawn, getting a good game. Since capturing the knight on c6 does not win a pawn, white usually plays bishop to a4, retreating the bishop and keeping pressure on Black's knight. White's general plan is to castle kingside and prepare to attack the e5 square with c3 and d4. Black often plays knight to f6, attacking white's center. White can play the solid d3, protecting the pawn, but white's most popular option is to castle. White ignores Black's attack on e4. If Black attempts to take the pawn with knight takes e4, white temporarily loses a pawn on the e-file, but notice that Black has a knight, pawn, and king all lined up on the open e-file. White's rook can now attack on the e-file with rook e1, attacking Black's knight. If Black's knight retreats, the rook will join the knight on f3 in attacking the e5 pawn, so white will regain that pawn. If Black tries to protect the knight, notice that white can simply play d3 on the next turn and force the knight off the e-file. Although knight takes e4 is a respectable line if black doesn't try to keep the pawn, black usually decides where to develop the dark squared bishop. Black sometimes plays bishop to c5, bringing the bishop to the active g1 to a7 diagonal. One good plan for white is to play c3, followed by d4, attacking the bishop and gaining a large center. Since the bishop on c5 can become a target of attack, black's most solid option is to play bishop to e7. Black is ready to castle with a solid position. It is very important for black to know what to do after white's most popular response, rook to e1. Once the e4 pawn is protected, white is ready to play bishop takes c6 and win the pawn on e5. Black should prevent this by playing b5, and after bishop to b3, black castles. White will prepare to attack black's center pawn on e5 with c3 and d4. Black usually defends e5 by playing d6 and deciding where to develop the light-squared bishop. This is one of the most well-known positions in the Ruy Lopez.